Hello, you're watching TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach, and this is World Talks. Now, Poland's parliament has approved a law to implement the EU's SAFE program, providing 43.7 billion euros for military modernization. But the measure now faces a key decision, whether President Nawrocki will sign it into law or exercise his veto. Now, the initiative supports artillery, drones, air defense, armored vehicles, and strategic mobility while ensuring NATO commitments. We're going to discuss that program and its implications with Jowanka Jakubek-Lalik, Associate Professor at the Faculty of Law and Administration, University of Warsaw, is in the studio with us. Good to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get to where we are, let's give a little recap. I already said SAFE. This is something that's been ongoing for a while. Tell us a bit why it's so critical right now and what's at stake if it's implemented or not.
SAFE is a financial instrument that provides quite a substantial amount of money to invest in EU security and defense capabilities. And what is important is based on a loan, but on a very, very, let's say, good terms for the government. So it's much better terms than the government would get in any other financial institution. Also, what is the requirement of the SAFE mechanism is that the money is invested within the EU, and the vast majority of the money will go into Polish defense industry, which also means that a lot of investment, a lot of new technologies, a lot of also dual-use technology, also from scientific perspective, very important to underline, can be directed to Polish industry and to Polish economy, which means that it's going to be very, very beneficial also from the economic perspective, but on the broader terms, in terms of security and safety of the country. Of course, this is the primary concern, and this is the mechanism that is addressing this concern.
And part of that, I mean, again, 43.7 billion euros, that's a lot, and Poland is getting the lion's share of a bigger program. I think 100-something is left, but it's going to Poland. There are loans, yes. One of the concerns, I suppose, raised by President Nawrocki was very much about the rate, mechanism. We talked about this idea of conditionality, that meaning that Poland would be somehow, let's say, under pressure from Brussels. Do you think those kind of arguments are warranted at all? And how does it compare maybe to other loans in the past, of buying, for instance, the South Korean weaponry?
Well, exactly. The conditionality mechanism, I think, is vastly misunderstood, because the conditionality mechanism in this case means that the European Commission will supervise how the money is spent, but meaning, for example, if there is no corruption mechanism, or is it spent on the things that the government promised it's going to spend. Yes, so if it's not going to be redirected towards other types of investment. So of course there is some supervisory authority of the European Commission, but only in a very, very limited capacity. So it's not that the European Commission will be able to influence exactly how the money is spent, or that it can influence exactly how the Polish government will act while spending these funds. It's just on this kind of legalistic perspective, and if the spending is in line with what the government actually promised in the plan of spending the money. So this is the conditionality mechanism. And indeed, as you mentioned, the mechanism which is providing the money for Poland, the SAFE mechanism, is much, the conditions are much, much better than, for example, the previous loans which were taken by the previous governments to buy weaponry, for example, from South Korea. The loans that were taken in the Korean banks were on a much, much higher it costed Polish government much, much more, meaning also that the current mechanism is going to be a much better option.
And in this whole process as well, let's see where we are now. It's gone through now green light, first of all, from European Commission, Brussels, now discussed here in the law level, in the Parliament in Poland, both houses. Where we are now, it needs that final signature. So in your sense, what's the timing now? How much time does the President have to either sign it into law or to veto it?
Well, President actually has three options on the table. He can sign the Act of Parliament, he can veto, which means that the Act of Parliament is coming back to the Parliament, and then the bigger majority is required to to override the veto. And then the third option for the President is to redirect this Act of Parliament to the Constitutional Tribunal, which could then say whether in the Constitutional Tribunal opinion this Act of Parliament is in line with the Polish Constitution or not. So these three options are on the table. However, also what needs to be underlined is that the President, even if he decides to veto or redirect to Constitutional Tribunal, cannot really stop the mechanism being implemented, because the safe mechanism is the mechanism within the existing framework of the European Union law and regulations, and it's based on the EU treaty, which means that this is not like the additional new instrument that needs a specific legislation. Actually, it's the EU regulation that does not need any specific implementing act on the national level to be implemented.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, there are many projects planned with all this money, some already probably in some shape already going forward. What happens if there is a veto? Is this will there be some kind of horse trading? Will he agree to something? What, in your sense, I mean, we're speculating here, what's he want out of this?
Well, you asked about the timeline, and that's precisely the question, because the money also needs to be redistributed quite soon. I think that the first tranche of the money should be redistributed until May, which leaves a very kind of short window for the government to spend the money, especially that I would like to remind that all the public money has to be spent according to the law and within the basis of the law. So the government cannot just spend it like it wants to spend, but it needs to be in accordance with the legal regulations of the Polish budget and so on, and the Act of Public Finance, which of course sets some limits to the public spending. So that is very important. So the more time the President takes, the more the government will be limited when it comes to the time to spend the money. So of course, in the best scenario, the President would cooperate with the government and sign the act as quickly as possible to provide the green light for spending the money. And also what is important, that if the President signs this Act of Parliament, it also means that the supervision on the spending of the money of the government will be much stronger, because it will be based on the Act of Parliament. Should the President decide not to sign the Act of Parliament or redirect it to the Constitutional Tribunal, then still the government has some instruments to implement this safe mechanism. However, the internal domestic national supervision will be limited. It will be only up to the European Commission to supervise how the government is spending it. Mm-hmm.
But it's also interesting because there's so much that, let's say, the conservative side of politics in this country is always very much built up. We mentioned the South Korean missiles and hardware and military assets, that they would be against this now. Do you see this as more of a technical resistance in some measures, or is this more or less political resistance?
Well, I think it's much more political, because the President, who is representing the opposition parties, first of all Law and Justice, but also Confederation Party, who are supporting the President, they are opposing the government. So basically the success of the government is a failure of the opposition party. This is how they perceive their role in the Polish politics. So this might be the kind of big factor in the President's decision. However, I would also like to point to the constitutional principles, and the President being responsible also for part of the defense policy of Poland, being the supreme commander of the Polish forces. He is also responsible and accountable for how the security situation of Poland looks like. So if he would oppose this mechanism, who is supposed to strengthen the security situation of Poland, then he's acting against his constitutional role, which is contradicting actually what he's supposed to be guarding, these principles that he's supposed to be guarding.
And given what's happened Saturday morning, as we're just covering it as well, the strikes in Iran very much also now happening. The threat of Iran, not just for the Americans, but also I think for a wider region, the capabilities. Part of this money from SAFE is supposed to go towards developing drone defense, air defense, missile defense. Do you think that this in any way is going to impact the President's decision one way or another?
Well, of course, we can only speculate, but I think that the overall geopolitical situation is very tense, and having in mind how different scenarios could play out, definitely anything that can be done to strengthen Polish security should be done. And this is in the best interest of the Polish government, of the Polish president. So all the public authorities should cooperate together with this principle in mind.
Mm-hmm. And also in terms of capacity, I mean, it's one thing to look at, oh, this is a lot of money, a lot can be developed with this. The industry, if we compare the defense contractors in Poland, it's not at the same level as if we look at France, maybe, or Italy. But at the same time, if this money goes through, is it enough? Is there a capacity there to roll out this industry? Will it be competitive? Will this be one of the, let's say, results of all this money?
Of course, there are some experts that should be asked this question when it comes to the capacities of the military sector and defense sector in Poland. However, also what I would like to say is that it's not only the government who is deciding how the money is spent. It's also the military, the generals, the officers of the Polish army who are much involved in programming and planning which parts of the Polish army and Polish security network as a system, much broader than just the military itself, will be strengthened by this funding. Also, Polish police force is going to get quite a substantial amount of money also to strengthen their safety and security capabilities. So this is an investment in the whole economy, not only in the industry, but also to strengthen public authorities, those who are responsible for the safety and security of the country and its citizens.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's one also argument that I believe the Law and Justice has made, that part of their problem with this is that it basically rules out buying and using these kind of loans for things that are not in Europe. This must be European. For instance, that American hardware would be ruled out. Apparently, there's also an idea that the Americans should do something of that nature. Legally, is this just another bit of politics? Do you see this at any sort of possibility? Is there a workaround to this? Are they stalling? What do you think of their argument?
Of course, there is an important argument when it comes to the money which is already spent for the Polish army modernization, and some of the equipment, of course, is from the United States, and we have already bought a lot of military equipment from American companies, and some of the investments, of course, will be continuing. However, this specific mechanism, safe mechanism, is directed to the EU and within the EU, and this is very good news, as I already mentioned, for Polish industry. However, those two, let's say, investments are not contradictory. So still, even though that the safe mechanism will be implemented, because as I said, probably the legal obstacles will be one way or the other managed by the government, still the investment in American equipment can continue, because the Polish budget will still continue to invest in the capabilities based on the previous agreements with the American government and American industries, American companies, meaning that it will also continue. So this is not a contradictory mechanism in any sense.
All right. I know that we have about 21 days, as you said, for the president to make up his mind in some way or other, but I do want to press you on what do you think is the most likely scenario once we talk again in 22 days' time about this?
Sure. Well, I think that it's a very difficult decision for the president, because he faces pressures from very different sides. On the one hand, he's for sure facing some pressures from the American side, because even though that the mechanism is not contradictory, it will focus the investments in the European sector, meaning that not that much money probably will be spent in American companies. But also the president is facing some pressures from the political parties that are supporting him. So first of all, Law and Justice, but also the Confederation Party, which Law and Justice is very much against this mechanism, explaining that it's going to be something that is limiting Polish sovereignty, and it's also redirecting the funds to the German industry, which is absolutely a false argument, because it's less than 0.5% that will actually go within this mechanism to the German industry. So this is not a valid argument at all. However, the pressures are very, very big, so the president needs to choose very, very carefully. As I mentioned, if he takes his role as supreme commander and person responsible for the state of the Polish security and safety, he should support this mechanism. But with other political pressures that he needs to face, he will probably choose some other options, maybe sending the Act of Parliament to the Constitutional Tribunal, which means that, you know, he didn't sign it, he didn't veto, so he waits for the decision of the tribunal, of the court, which also gives him, let's say, a political argument that he is hesitating and waiting for the decision from the judges.
All right, as you said, timing is key, but it's also politics, and a lot of money at stake, so it'll be interesting to see how this develops. So thanks for all those insights. Always a pleasure having here. Jowanka Jakubek-Lalik, thank you so much. And thank you for watching World Talk. We'll stay right here for more news and commentary on TVP World. Goodbye.